here, very interestingly enough,
Hi, good
here,
morning. Goodbye.
good morning, good morning. So we've been learning about the what went on in the Beis Hamikdash when they did the water drawing ceremony, which was a very big celebration, and how they had an issue with men and women mingling, and they had to build something, which is basically a balcony. It's a gezustera. That was the term the Gemara uses. Kifuha gezustera. They surrounded it with a like a balcony, which we said was basically made of two types of there were two items. There was beams coming out from the Beis Hamikdash, beams coming out from the walls, and then they
Yeah,
just put a
sure.
board.
Yeah, I opened the.
And then so they had these beams coming out, and then they just put a board on it, and you basically had a balcony.
Sounded like bleachers to me.
Yeah, almost like bleachers, but the term gazustera, yeah, basically a balcony. Now, now the famous question that's discussed in halachic books about the source for a mechitza in a shul. Where does it say anywhere that you need to have a mechitza? And the actual source for a mechitza comes from this Gemara, the Gemara that we're learning here, how there was this issue of men and women mingling or at least seeing each other, kalos roish, some type of frivolity, and they had to put the women on a balcony, and the question is, why is it not brought in the regular Shulchan Aruch, this law? Why is it not, why is it only later commentaries? Why doesn't it actually say it in the Shulchan Aruch? So one of the understandings is it used to be that women didn't go to shul. Women going to shul is somewhat of a new type of concept. They bring their kids and they get out. There's eruvs. It used to be you didn't really have a option to go to. The women didn't have the opportunity to go to shul, and they didn't have kids programs. And instead of a woman bringing her kids to shul and everyone making noise, they stay at home and make noise. It's and so and a lot of women did a very minimal davening. So it seems that that's the reason why it's not really brought in Shulchan Aruch. There is a whole list of things that are not brought in Shulchan Aruch that are halachas. Maybe at some point we'll pull them up. But there is a list that's brought down of things that it doesn't mention in the Shulchan Aruch, even though it seems to be pretty much straight halacha. Now, however, the matter here that we're dealing with, which is mechitza, having a separation between men and women, it really is a big topic of discussion, because the question is, what is the reason why we need a mechitza? Is it because men are not supposed to look at women during davening, especially? It ruins the daven. Of course, we're not supposed to gaze at women anytime, but during davening especially is a problem because it causes us to have negative, inappropriate thoughts
I
and
used I used to give
ruin.
a lecture
Right.
to Rabbi Lipsker, and the way I put it was, the problem is that when you have somebody sitting next to you or visible, your mind is not on Hashem and the davening that's in front of you. That's the best way I could put it.
So
Each to his own. Different ages have different things, but your mind is not on davening.
right. So the question is, but what is the real? What you're saying is correct, but is that the um, does it boil down to that? Is that what the purpose of a mechitza boils down to? So in the Paiskim we find 2 points. One is that you're not supposed to be, like Isaac is saying, that you shouldn't be thinking about women And if you see them and you're staring at them, it's ruining your davening. And as Isaac says, you're just simply not able to concentrate on Hashem, or or even if you are able to, it ruins your davening. Meaning it postles it invalidates your davening, and this is brought down as a having a hirhurim thoughts during your davening, having inappropriate or impure thoughts during your davening. It ruins the davening from being accepted. But then there's another understanding that it's not about thoughts, and that it's really about not mingling. That the mechitza is not meant. In other words, thoughts are important, but not, a person shouldn't have impure thoughts or just be thinking about women instead of Hashem or so on. And of course that's correct, but that not necessarily is that the obligation of the mechitza. The mechitza is that the men and women shouldn't be mingling together. And in addition to that, of course, you have your own obligation of not having inappropriate thoughts. But when you learn this Gemara, so how did they initially deal with this problem of men and women being together? So the initial thought, the Gemara says, was Berishayna, in the beginning, which we translated that the initial the initial way things were, like in time of the first Beis Hamikdash. I don't know why I'm not seeing it now, but yeah, Chalaka Hisa Berishayna. This is so it says they made a tikkun gadol, and it says, like it says in Midas, that it was Chalaka Haya Berishayna. There is an understanding here that the Rishayna means the first Beis Hamikdash, Mikdash Rishon. They used to be without any balcony. It was Chalaka. It was flat. It was smooth. Then they added this Gezustara, which is this balcony made of beams, and then they put boards on it. And there seems to be an understanding here that the beams that came out from the wall were placed there permanently, and the boards that were placed on top of the beams, the boards were possibly only temporarily for those 7 days, for Sukkot and so on. But this is what made up a gezustera, this is what made up the balcony. And so what was the way it was initially? So initially you had it that the women were bifnim in the anoshim mibachutz. The men were outside, the women inside. So they had the men standing outside the Beis Hamikdash. The women were inside the Ezras Nashim, the women's section. Now we are outside, we're the men. So the men were outside. There's an area called the soreg, which basically is some type of a fence around the Beis Hamikdash, where it says goyim were not allowed to enter past that area. And it also Tummy Mace, anyone that was a Tummy Mace couldn't enter. Anyone that was impure from a dead body wouldn't be able to enter, and any nachri, a goy, was not allowed to enter. So it's called from it was some type of a fence that was like a 10 tfachim fence, which is the lowest Jewish law of how high a fence has to be. 10 tfachim, which is somewhere around 30 something inches, 31 inches or so, up to 40 different opinions as to how big 10 tfachim is. But there was this soireg, and the area in between it was called the chel. So you have that area is where the men stood. So why did they have the men standing on the outside and the women inside? It sounds very surprising that it started out this way. So one of the commentaries mentions, he says, you know why? Because they needed space. There was a lot more men than women. And so they had the men standing outside because it gave a lot more space for the men and the overflow and so on. So that's why they had the men outside. But what happened? The men were outside, but what happened? They were looking inside where the Levium were singing. So what ended up happening was there was a connection. They were staring at the women that were inside that were inside. In other words, they're looking past the women to the Levium. But what ended up happening was it was causing kalus reish, frivolousness between because they're staring at the women. In addition, of course, they're looking at the Levium, but it's leading to sinful thoughts and sinful behavior. So they made a decree that the women should be on the outside and then the men would be inside. Now, this sounded like it was a good option because now the men inside, they'll be staring at the Levium, and the women are outside the opposite direction, right? So the men aren't going to see them, but it still didn't work because some men turned around. So that's when they said, no, let's better put the women on top. So that's the understanding that the women ended up on top on the balcony and the men are below. And that's the source for having balconies. Many of the European shuls had balconies for the women, which is based on this Gemara that the issue of kalus roish, and that it shouldn't lead to either mingling or thoughts and so on. So again, I mentioned that the source of a mechitza is here, and that there are two opinions as to what the reason behind it is. If it has to do with mingling, which is Reb Moshe Feinstein's opinion, that you see here that they weren't concerned about seeing women, about mistakel gazing at women, because that wasn't going to help if the men are outside, the women are inside. So it must be that they were concerned about more mingling. That's the way Reb Moshe understands. He says if the issue is mingling, then we don't need a mechitza to cover one's eyes. You don't have to block. It doesn't have to be as tall as one's face that you don't see. It doesn't have to block one's vision, but it just has to make it that you wouldn't mingle. Now, so Reb Moshe held that a mechitza that's 18 handbreadths, which could be somewhere around 5 feet or maybe even less, could be permissible. Again, we have to find out what Reb Moshe holds. How big is a tefach according to Reb Moshe? Because he held the mechitza has to be 18 tefachim handbreadths. So a tefach, according to Reb Moshe, Moshe Feinstein. I'm just looking if the internet has Moshe Feinstein, a tefach. Here, this looks like a good reference of measurements. Okay. A tefach is 3.62 inches. So according to him, 10 tefachim is 36.2 inches. Well, let's see. 18 tefachim times 3.62. 18 times 3.62. 18 times 3.62. Oh, messed up. 3.62. 65.16. According to Reb Moshe, it seems that you would need a machitza of 5.5 feet. 5 feet and 5 inches. 5 feet and 5 inches. Maybe his opinion changed, but I saw a tshuva from Moshe. At least I know he has many tshuvas about the mechitza. One of them clearly says 18 tfachim. Two of them I think I saw that say 18 tfachim, which would basically, according to him, following his measurement of what a tefach is, he held it should be 5 feet. And the reason is it doesn't have to be taller than a person's vision. It has to be tall enough that people can't really mingle easily. Now, other opinions held that no, it's about not seeing, not gazing and seeing, thinking about women. And if that's the case, then you needed a mechitza to be taller. So this is a topic of a lot of discussion. How tall does the mechitza need to be? I see we have two thoughts, or two questions. Or David, yes.
There's a story that there were two friends, and each one went to Reb Moshe to ask this question, unknown to the other one. So to one, Reb Moshe said 5 feet, and to the other one, Reb Moshe said 6 feet. So he came back. So the 5-foot guy said to Reb, he came back to Reb Moshe. He says, "My friend, you told him 6 feet. Why are you trying to be lenient with me?" He said, "No, it's just he said, 5 feet is the amount, but your friend, he needs 6 feet. Either because he was taller or because he was looking."
Okay, interesting. Yes, Jeffrey.
But that doesn't mean that women have to be completely blocked by a wall. It just means they have to be tall. In other words, you
mean the women should be able to see through to the men, just the men should be able to see the women. Even if you want to be machmir, it doesn't mean the women can't see the men. Yeah, you could have a one-sided glass or something. Yeah, or it could just be not clear. You could just make it cloudy.
That's right. There's a lot of possibilities. People need. In any case, I see it to signal one another, like the kids running around, or like I can't hold the kid right now, etc. So you need to be able to get a signal, and there's a lot of interesting constructions that I've seen that are the right height, but the women can see, or in some cases the women can touch the Sefer Torah with a book, for example.
Right. Okay. Doesn't have to be. So your point is that it shouldn't have to be that they're separate room, that they can't have any that they don't they hardly have connection. No, they hardly have participation. Yeah. Now the only thing is, Rav Moshe does say something else that everyone seems to disregard, and that is that if the women are dressed inappropriately, like their arms are not covered, in other words, up to the elbow, including the elbow, and and so on. So then the mechitza could be, that it's a good mechitza, but still the men are not really allowed to daven if they're facing women that are dressed inappropriately. They would have to face the opposite direction. So the concept of having a mechitza that's taller actually does cover the other problem of Rav Moshe. So even if Rav Moshe's opinion of a mechitza could be, not necessarily does it need to be so tall, but if you want to cover the other issue that he mentions in the same tshuva, in at least one of the tshuvas that he writes about mechitza, again, he has many discussions. Of course, it was a topic of a lot of Rabbanim arguing with Rav Moshe that the mechitza should be taller and so on. But Rav Moshe does mention this issue of if the women are not dressed appropriately, then the mechitza could still be a problem, and better they should have maybe a bigger mechitza. Better the women should dress properly, that's for sure. But at least they should have a taller mechitza in order that the men could daven without having to turn the opposite direction, a different direction. Yes, Jeffrey.
So the same is the issue in the first this discussion that the women were on the inside. It's much more protective to have the women on the inside, like we know about security nowadays, right? So I think originally the idea was that the most secure place was inside, and that's why the men were outside around the women. But the same issue could be that about the dress code. But
You understand it to be an issue of security. That's why they,
yes,
because I mentioned that the reason why the men were on the outside was space-wise.
I'm
At
sure
least
that,
one opinion says that it had to do with space. That's why they had the women on the inside, which was much more limiting, and then the men would be on the outside, just allowed more, allowed more space for them. But the problem was that the men were still looking at them. So anyway, the men
right.
were still looking through the women to go to see the Levium who were playing the music and doing the juggling and so on or whatever. So ultimately, it didn't help. In other words, separating them into different rooms didn't help. And so
Correct.
therefore, so I think what Moshe is trying to prove from this Gemara is that it must be that it was more than just looking at them, because they didn't have a mechitza here. They just were one was inside the Azara, and the other was outside the Azara, but it doesn't necessarily help. It's not like they had a it's not like they couldn't see. They could see each other.
Correct.
So that is Rav Moshe's proof that must be that it's okay, even if you could see each other. It's more about mingling together. That's Rav Moshe's proof. But of course, the many poskim argue on that and hold that a mechitza has to be more like 6 feet or so on. Okay.
Also, it's very important to remember that we know a lot more now about the Beis HaMikdash in the time of, for example, of the Hashmonaim. And in Jerusalem, they can show you where they brought the water up when in the time of the Hashmonaim, etc. So it was a much smaller place. Now it's very grand and very large space on the top of the mountain. And that all came about only in the Roman time, and not long before the destruction, in the time of King Herod.
Mm-hmm.
And he especially built galleries all around so that even people who are not allowed in could watch. The high galleries all around. But all of that was impossible earlier. And that's why we have the Western Wall, and we don't call it by a normal word for wall, because it was keeping the fill-in of the hill, the fill-in space to make it larger had to be filled, and had to have a special kind of wall to hold all the extra earth and stones or whatever that were thrown inside to make it a larger platform.
Mm-hmm. Where do you know this from? That you're telling us about the Herod's time? It was actually made much bigger, and it was in order for those people to be able to come and see. And
it's in the Gemara also. There's a story in the Gemara, but I haven't found. I only read about it in a separate book. That they sent a message to Rome. They said, "We have a plan. We're going to make expansion over here, whatever." And they told the messenger, "Take a year to go and a year to come back." And meantime, they built as much as they could.
Yeah, we saw that.
Actually came back that you're a bad. If you started before the guy came back to you, you're a bad servant, right? But the truth was, Herod wanted to build a place that was as magnificent as anything in Rome, and he knew Rome. They all knew they had been to Rome among the nobility of the Jews, and so it's in the Gemara and.
Right, except that you're adding a lot of details. That how long, like what they built, is what you're adding.
Yeah.
In other words, the year we saw in the Gemara, the year to get there, year to get back, and so spend the year there. So that information we saw, and we saw that Herod did make the most beautiful. It was a magnificent building, but you're adding a lot about the layout and the topography of
Yes.
how they changed the setting. So I'm just saying like that. You saw this in a book, like
I
the
was,
research, like research.
I
Uh-huh.
was unbelievable things that I saw in Jerusalem.
Uh-huh.
So,
So you had a
so
tour.
after, yeah, sure, many after 67 was the first time it was possible to really excavate and to know the dimensions of everything and to see where the growth was. So
Right.
they can show you when you go in the tunnels,
Uh-huh.
okay, where were the original steps that they brought water up to the Beis Hamikdash from below, and they can show you the bore that they had below
Right.
the water. And they
Right.
only could see this after 67. It took a while before they could dig it all out.
Now that I understand. I'm just wondering how you know the difference between the way it was before Herod and after Herod. That's what
So,
was
so part of the tour was had uh,
so,
collected data from the archaeologists
so
that
it's uh-huh.
that this is what we found, and this was what the explanation, and this was from the time of Hashmonaim, and so
Uh-huh.
and you could see that it goes right up to where the Kodesh Kodashim was, or
Right.
that vicinity, okay,
Uh-huh.
and that
So
wasn't true later.
was this like a City of David tour, or was this
No,
the tunnel tours? In the
tunnel,
tunnel tours, you got
especially in
all
the
this?
tunnel tour, yeah, especially in the tunnel tour.
Uh-huh.
Okay, and
Right.
so I think that I
Be-
don't know that it's been printed, but I think if we had the right archaeologists to talk to, that they could tell us what they have discovered about earlier, like foundations and things like this.
Right.
Now they have
Right.
pieces of what they think are from the Beis Hamikdash Rishon
Hmm.
too. They have pieces of things that they think are from that time, etc.
Right.
So
Okay.
anyhow, so it's amazing, but where we have a, a possibility of more knowledge than people had earlier,
Right.
to think
Right.
about it in smaller dimensions.
Yeah, yeah. Shkoyach. Okay. Anyway, getting back to the Gemara. Okay, so we spoke a little now about the mechitza, about the way they made it, then about this balcony, and according to Rav Moshe, the balcony actually doesn't need any type of wall, because once they're on a different a level, then they're not really, you can't really mingle with them. On the other hand, of course, you need a wall because you don't want people to fall. So there's a mitzvah smaika to have a wall that they shouldn't fall down. But mitzad mechitza, you don't really need a mechitza according to Rav Moshe. According to others, you would need a mechitza still because of the problem of histaklus, which, and then according to Rav Moshe, you would also have to have some type of covering if it's the women aren't, the women don't have their sleeves until they're including their elbow, that cover their elbow, and if they don't cover their, their, if they don't cover their shirts are not buttoned to the top and so on. So there could be issues of reciting Shema and other prayers in front of erva, in front of things, in front of parts of a body that should be clothed, and therefore you would need a mechitza for those purposes. So you need, because of a
What's
micah, because of fence, they shouldn't fall, and because of tznius.
what's Ishtakos?
Histaklos is gazing.
Okay.
Now, the Gemara says that, and how did they build on to the Beis Hamikdash if everything was supposed to be from Hashem, how it was built? And the understanding that some of the commentaries mention here is that if they were just going to put something like temporarily, maybe wouldn't have been such a problem. But the mechitza that they built, it involved having these beams coming out from the wall of the Beis Hamikdash that that would make, they would be put there permanently. They may, even if you would just put the boards on top of the beams temporarily for those 7 days, but still the beams were there permanently. And how could you do that if everything was supposed to be bichsav? It was written down by David Hamelech, all that Hashem had told the prophets, and the prophets told David, Miyad Hashem alai hiskil. that David HaMelech wrote it down and gave it to his son Shlomo HaMelech, who built the Beis HaMikdash. It was all from Hashem because of the prophets. And we mentioned Rashi says, we mentioned what Rashi says. Yesterday we mentioned what Rashi says, which was the prophet God and the prophet Nasan Hanavi, the two prophets of the day. Now, there is a source that David HaMelech, when he was running away from Shaul, he ran to Shmuel Hanavi. And he ran to the prophet who had anointed him. And he was very nervous that that Shaul was going to kill him. And when he went to him, he escaped to him, and it says that there must be a medrash or something. They mentioned that what did they learn together? They learned together the building, all about the building of the Beis Hamikdash, the measurements and so on of the Beis Hamikdash. So there is an understanding here that this pasuk Hakol b'chsav miyad Hashem alai hiskil is referring to Shmuel Hanavi, that Shmuel Hanavi shared this information with David HaMelech, not Nasan and God, but rather Shmuel Hanavi Samuel. So anyway, so there's two understandings what it refers to, but basically everything seems to have to have been given to David. You can't just add on to the Beis Hamikdash just because you want to. So Rav says, no, but they found the pasuk. And what was the pasuk that they found? So they found this pasuk that it seems it's talking about Mashiach ben Yosef. At least that's the way that they're doing a hesped. They're doing a eulogy for Mashiach ben Yosef. And it says that they have to separate the men and the women, even for the hesped, for this eulogy. So the Gemara says, the Kavachimer, if you have to separate, if you have to have a bachitza, or separate them for a eulogy, for sure you have the men alone and the women alone. So if you have them for a eulogy, for sure you have to separate them for something that's joyous, and we have a Yetzer Hara. And the term that the Gemara used was la'asid lava. In the future, they're going to be involved in something negative, a hesped, and there's no Yetzer Hara, and still you need to have the men separate from the women. So now when they're involved in something joyous and there is a Yetzer Hara, for sure you have to separate them. And the way Rashi understood it is, there are two separate things. There's the one point is that we're not dealing with a joyous time. We're dealing with a hesped. Mashiach ben Yosef, the first Mashiach, is going to be killed, and then we have. So it's a sad thing, and still you need to separate. And also, it's a time when there's no Yetzer Hara, because Hashem is going to slaughter the Yetzer Hara when Mashiach comes, and therefore. There's two reasons why it shouldn't really be an issue of having the men and women together. And nevertheless, we have to separate them. How much more so when it's time of joy and people are a little more loose and, a good chance of them, getting frivolous. In addition to that, the fact that there is a Yetzer Hara, so for sure we have to be concerned. And therefore, so that idea, that pasuk, the Gemara understands to be a source that we're supposed to correct this problem. There should be some type of a separation between the men and the women. So it's an interesting Gemara, because the Gemara says everything had to be given over as part of the how to build the Beis Hamikdash. And then it says that, well, we found a pasuk that talks about a eulogy in Zechariah, so that's going to teach us that we're allowed to change the way the Beis Hamikdash was. How does this work? Did it have to be given over as part of the rules of how to build the Beis Hamikdash, or not? How does this pasuk really help us? So you found the pasuk, but does the pasuk really allow us to transgress? Almost, we're sort of like transgressing the rule of the Beis Hamikdash was built in a certain way. How does it really help us? What do we learn from the pasuk? So the Maharsha understands it over here to mean that the pasuk is basically the point of the Gemara is that we're not switching something because of the Beis Hamikdash necessity. We're not making a change in the Beis Hamikdash and going against the way Hashem said, no, the Beis Hamikdash should be this way. We're not making a change in that. What we're doing is there's a side problem. The Beis Hamikdash, this is the way the Beis Hamikdash is supposed to be. But there's a side issue that has to do with an area of arayos, of inappropriate mingling, and therefore, because of a side issue, we're changing it. The Beis Hamikdash, yeah, that's the Beis Hamikdash. We're not changing the Beis Hamikdash for the Beis Hamikdash purposes. We're changing the Beis Hamikdash because of another alternative reason, a side reason, a different technical issue that's not connected to the Beis Hamikdash. That we're allowed to do. We're not allowed to change the Beis Hamikdash and say, Hashem, you told us to build the Beis Hamikdash this way. We want to build it differently. We're not doing that. We're building it the way you want it. But there's also a problem of mingling between the men and women. So because of that side issue, we're going to be building something else. That's why Maharsha understands the Gemara, that if you're making a change in the Beis Hamikdash, that's prohibited. That's not allowed. That would be criminal activity. But if you're making a change because of something else, an external matter, that would be permissible. That's the way Maharsha understands it. There's an Igros Moshe on this where actually it's the same Igros Moshe with the Mechitza. And he mentions over there, he says, you can't really learn like the Maharsha, he says, because why does the Gemara have to bring a pasuk? Just say that it's a side issue. So therefore, he understands it that the Chachamim understood that this is a biblical obligation from the Torah, and therefore, this is part of Hashem's command. You know, Hashem commanded you to build the Beis Hamikdash, and He commanded you with all these dimensions. And there's also a statement in the Torah that you have to separate the men and the women. So therefore, it must be that this is part of the commands. In other words, the Gemara's answer is that there is a statement in the Psukim that we know is obviously biblical, because it says about this the eulogy, when Mashiach comes, we're going to have there's an understanding here that this is obviously a biblical law. You got to separate the men and the women, and the Gemara understands that it must fit with the other statement of Miyad Hashem Alai Hiskel, that the Beis Hamikdash has certain dimensions that have to be that way, and those dimensions obviously have to fit with the other statement that is biblical, that we need to have a separation from the men and the women. So that's the way Rav Moshe, again, the question is, what is the mechanism, how we're answering the question in the Gemara? What mechanism is the Gemara using to explain how this was allowed? Is it a mechanism of the fact that this is not transgressing that law because that law only applied to Beis Hamikdash dimensions, and this is a different issue that for that we're allowed to make a change? That's the Maharsha's way. The other way is that this is the meaning of what Hashem said in the dimensions of the Beis Hamikdash has to fit with this biblical law as well, because we know there's a biblical law about having separation between men and women because of a kal v'chomer, because of a priori argument, and therefore this must fit with the pasuk of that it's all from Hashem. This as well is from Hashem. That meaning that we have to connect the two and say that you have to build it with these dimensions, in addition to having a balcony. And so that's the answer of the Gemara. And we spoke yesterday that the Gemara here, you see a very interesting thing, that there's two Yetzer Haras really. There's the Yetzer Hara there's two elements of sinning. One is from Yetzer Hara convincing you to sin, and the other is that just because you're used to doing certain things, you might end up continuing and doing it. And that's why even in the time when Mashiach comes, that if a person is used to sinning, there's a potential that he could continue sinning because he's so used to it, not because there's a Yetzer Hara. A question I asked on that yesterday was, but doesn't he have a Yetzer Tov? Well, shouldn't the Yetzer Tov be able to convince him not to do this? There's not going to be Yetzer Hara, but the Gemara says we still need to separate the men and the women, even when Mashiach comes, even though there's no Yetzer Hara. Why do you need to separate? There's no Yetzer Hara. So the one of the Sfarim bring down that because person is used to doing these type of sins, he might continue doing it even without a Yetzer Hara. Question is, seemingly he has a Yetzer Tov. I guess the Yetzer Tov can't win against a person's nature. Person makes their nature that way. I guess that wins sometimes over the Yetzer Tov. Could win over the good inclination. But in any event, this is the initial understanding over here of the eulogy is for Mashiach ben Yosef. Now, why is Mashiach ben Yosef? What is this whole concept of having two Mashiachs? We have a Mashiach, the son of David, who of course is the Mashiach that we're waiting for. But then there's also a Mashiach ben Yosef who comes before Mashiach ben David. And the Mashiach ben Yosef, what does he do? He is going to get killed. So what is his job really? So it's brought down that Amalek is supposed to be destroyed by the children of Rachel, Yosef, the descendants of Yosef. Where do we see that? We see that in one of the Haftarahs. It mentions V'haya beis Yaakov la'esh, u'beis Yosef lahava, u'beis Esav lakash. Right? Rashi brings it down in Chumash that Yosef is somehow the one who's going to get rid of Esav, is going to get rid of Amalek. That Yosef is the one who removes this evil, the evil of Esav. Yosef gets rid of that. And his descendant, Yosef's descendant, is going to be the one who's going to get rid of Yosef. Now, that's going to cause this war of Gog and Magog. That's going to create a big problem. And he gets rid of Esav. This is what's happening very soon, because we're going to be destroying Iran probably. And this might be being done by the child of Yosef, possibly. And according to the understanding is that the nations are going to all gang up and kill this Mashiach ben Yosef after he gets rid of Amalek, gets rid of Esav. Then the nations are going to gang up on him and kill him. And there's going to be a eulogy, and this is going to be right before Mashiach comes. So why does he deserve to get killed? Why does Mashiach ben Yosef deserve to get killed? So it's brought down, very interesting. This is something really, really interesting, that Mashiach ben Yosef is atoning, is rectifying the sin of all the kings of Israel. They all worshipped idols. They all sinned. They were all evil kings from Yeravam all the way down. The kingdom of Israel was idol worship was rampant, and they all were sinners. And so Mashiach ben Yosef, now who was Yeravam? He was also he was a descendant of Yosef from Ephraim, and so the descendants of Yosef are going to be atoned. All the kings, they're going to be atoned for by this Mashiach ben Yosef. He's going to atone for them by getting killed. And the Geula, the complete Geula, will come afterwards through Mashiach ben David. So this gives us a little understanding also of what's what's meant to happen, and we might be seeing it with our own eyes. That's Hashem. Hopefully, it'll be b'chesed of v'rachamim, with mercy from Hashem. Now, the Gemara continues, and we're going to start now from the next piece of Gemara that we are up to. We're up to Ha Hespeda Mai Avidite. And this is 7 lines from the top of the page on 52a. 52a, 7 lines from the top of the page. Ha Hespeda Mai Avidite. This hesped, this eulogy, what is the meaning behind it that's going to happen? What's it about? What is it doing? What's it for? So we understood moments ago from Rashi that this is a hesped from the prophecy of Zechariah about the eulogy for Mashiach ben Yosef, who's getting killed in this war of Gog and Magog. And during that war, during that hesped, during that eulogy, it's going to be separating men and women. But the Gemara really says it's not as simple as it sounds. The hesped, the Gemara asks, what exactly, who is it for? And now the Gemara really says it's really 2 opinions. Pligi bar Rav Doisa of Rabbanon. There's really a machlokes Rav Doisa and the Rabbanon, the rabbis. Chad Omar, one says Al Mashiach ben Yosef Shenerag. This is eulogy is for Mashiach ben Yosef, that he gets killed, and there's going to be a eulogy for him during this war of Gog and Magog. Mashiach ben Yosef is going to get killed, as I just explained. It's going to be a rectifying the sin of all the kings of Israel who sinned, and so it's going to be the eulogy for Mashiach ben Yosef. And the other opinion, Chad v'Chad Amar, one of them says, Al Yetzer Hara Shenerag. This is that the reason why there's going to be a eulogy, it's for the Yetzer Hara that gets killed. Hashem is going to slaughter the Yetzer Hara and the evil inclination. And so that is why we're going to have a eulogy. Of course, the Gemara asks, you need a eulogy for destroying the Yetzer Hara? I would think we would rejoice. And the Gemara says, Bishleima, it's good Lamanda Amar, according to the opinion of Mashiach ben Yosef Shenerag, that it's all about, that it's a eulogy for Mashiach, the son of Yosef, that when he gets killed, behind the Sivan, and that's what the meaning of the pasuk in Zechariah is, Vebitu Eli, Eis Asher Dakaru. They will stare at me, he that they stabbed, V'saftu Alav, and they will eulogize him, Kemispaid al hayachid, as someone gives a hesped for an only child, and so that's referring to Mashiach ben Yosef. So it makes sense that it's referring to Mashiach ben Yosef because it uses that term, someone they stabbed, and they will give a hesped on him, like on like a person who gives a hesped for an only child. And so what does it mean they stabbed? It means the nations of the world stabbed Mashiach ben Yosef. Or it means that the Yidden caused Mashiach ben Yosef to be stabbed because we are the ones. Commentaries bring over here, they bring commentaries that say this referring to the Yidden. It's that we stabbed him because we caused him to be stabbed because he's dying because of the sins of the nation. So, which I guess could fit with what we said earlier, that he's dying because of the sins of the 10 tribes, or the kings of the 10 tribes. Or it could mean that it's dying because of the native, because of the sins of the people now. Maybe that's the reason why he's getting killed, because he's He's being killed because of the Avain Hadar of today. Possibly that would be an alternative interpretation. Before we said it had to do with the kings, it's rectifying the sins of the kingdom of Israel. But seems to be another understanding that he's dying because of the sins of the people, meaning of today. Now that would fit with Mashiach ben Yosef. Again, it's a plural, so it seems that it's the people. We stabbed him, so to speak. But according to the opinion that it's al Yetzahara Shenarag, it's about the Yetzahara who's getting killed. This you're making a eulogy, you should be rejoicing. Amai Bachu. Why did they cry? So the Gemara says, Kididarash Rabbi Yehuda. It's like Rabbi Yehuda expounds. That Hashem in the future is going to bring the Yetzirah and slaughter him in front of the tzaddikim, ubifnei harashayim, and in front of the wicked. He's going to slaughter the Yetzirah. Tzaddikim nidma lahem tehar gavaya. For the tzaddikim, the Yetzirah appeared to them like a big mountain. Urashayim, and the wicked, nidma lahem, the Yetzirah, the evil inclination, appeared to them kechot hasayra, like a hair's breadth. Halalu baichen, bahalalu baichen, and both of them are going to cry. Tzaddikim baichen, the righteous are going to cry, and they're going to say, how were we able to ever win over and conquer this big mountain? How did we do it? The righteous are going to cry over the evil inclinations. They're going to say, how is it possible that how did we do it? And look, they're going to think of all the pain that they went through in order to conquer the evil inclination, the tsaris, the tsar, the pain that they had, in order to control themselves, and that they withheld from themselves enjoyments and things in order to win over the evil inclination. They're going to think back of all of the pain that they went through. And the Rishayim, they're also going to cry. And they're going to say, they're going to cry and say, how did we not conquer this evil inclination? To conquer this hairbreadth. Like, why were we unable to, we couldn't control ourselves from a simple little hair's breadth, like this would have been so easy to win over the evil inclination. We could have easily, kept Shabbos. We could have easily put tefillin on every day. We could have easily done, we couldn't, it's so hard. Give a little extra tzedakah. We couldn't have done that. Like, why was it so hard for us? We can't understand why we couldn't control ourselves. And even Hashem wonders about them. Shenemar, as it says, Koyamar Hashem, so says Hashem, Ki poli be'enei she'eretz ha'mazeh v'yomim hahem. It will be wondrous in my eyes, the remnants of this nation in those days. Ki poli be'enei, it's going to be wondrous in the eyes of the remnants of the people. And gam be'enai poli, and also in my eyes, it will be wondrous. And this is about the tzaddikim, that Hashem will be impressed and surprised how they were able to handle it and to conquer it and all the tzaras that they went through. Gam be'enai poli, that even Hashem will be in shock, will be impressed. Okay, so that's the understanding that it's referring to the tzaddikim, the righteous, because it says the remnants of the people, and the remnants of the people mean that they're humble. So it's referring to the tzaddikim. Now, the seemingly there's a lot of discussion about the meaning of this Gemara. The righteous think of Hashem. I'm sorry. The righteous think of the evil inclination as this big mountain, and the wicked think of this evil inclination as a small, as this tiny, as this hair's breadth, very minimal thing. Of course, a lot of discussion what this, why this is, what is the meaning behind this. Now, we mentioned that Rashi understands the Gemara to mean that the righteous are crying because they remember all the pain they went through. There is another understanding that they're crying that they're no longer going to have the ability to do mitzvahs. Once we get rid of the Yetzer Hara, then there's no more reward, because you don't get a reward when it's easy, when it's simple. You only get a reward when there's a evil inclination. So now they're no longer going to have the merits that they were able to get. So that's another meaning of why they would be crying. And another understanding of why they're crying is that when the tzaddikim realize how powerful the evil inclination is, they realize, oh boy, we never conquered the evil inclination. It must be Hashem helped us. So we're probably not getting much reward, because it must have been not our own power. We never would have been able to win over this evil inclination. It must have been that it was Hashem who helped us win over the inclination. So they're seeing this big mountain. It's going to cause them to cry. So again, the Rashi learned the crying is from all the pain that they went through. And the other understanding is they're crying because they no longer will get merits. And the third reason is they're crying because they realize that they don't deserve so much reward, because it must have been that Hashem had helped them all along. And therefore, I guess it's not really us. How would we never could have conquered that. It's so big. And the answer that Hashem, and the conclusion is, it says that even Hashem is surprised when he sees the tzaddikim, and he's wondrous. And one of the understandings would be that Hashem wonders how they conquered it. It would be, you think that you are not, it must have been I helped you? No, I'm even surprised that you got it. So it's not that I helped you. You were the ones who did it, and I can't even understand how you pulled it off. Meaning that Hashem is sort of answering them that they will merit great reward because they are the ones who accomplished it. So anyway, that's the simple understanding. There is one other understanding here, that it's Hashem is wondrous about the wicked. How come they didn't? Even Hashem is surprised. How come you couldn't conquer the evil inclination? Hashem created the Torah, and the Torah would have made it easy. You could have easily just learned some Torah. You would have been able to conquer the evil inclinations. That's an alternative shot here, that it's referring to the wicked. The simple understanding is that it's referring to the righteous. Okay, we're going to stop here. Sei gesund, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.